We've got our late model Silverado in the shop today for some final upgrades to the drivetrain before it gets its final boost in performance. And when we're done, this late model Silverado will be a high performance street sleeper that can clean up at the track and still get you to work Monday through Friday.
There are a few areas we're going to address, like the transmission, the rear axle, and the drive shaft. We want to take care of any factory weaknesses that may remain. So when all that horsepower goes up, we won't have any worries.
This Silverado came from the factory with a 6L80 6-speed automatic transmission. And while they do have their strong points, they aren't the most robust transmission in the whole world, especially once you start tossing a power adder into the mix like we're about to do. Now don't get me wrong, there are some people out there who have decent power going through a 6L80, but there's also people out there who damage them on a stock engine. And this is the perfect example. When this truck had only 150,000 miles on it, the rear planetary gear set stripped off, sent material through the pump, and took out the entire transmission. So, needless to say, we don't have a ton of faith in the stock automatic. So what's the solution? Well, we're going to swap this trans out with another one and show you guys at home what it takes to make that happen.
We started by looking for a transmission that would handle the power we're about to put down. The natural choice for us was the tried and true 4L80. You can think of it as a turbo 400 with overdrive. It's a 4-speed automatic that came in 3/4 and 1-ton pickups since the early 90s. But any old junkyard 4L80 just isn't going to cut it.
We know that Monster Transmission built some pretty stout automatics, so we ordered an Xtreme Super Duty version of the 4L80E. It's rated at 1,100 horsepower and 1,000 pound-feet of torque, so we know it's going to withstand whatever we can throw at it, and then some. It's upgraded with goodies like a Kevlar band, front and rear, a heavy-duty sprag, and recalibrated valve body. We chose to upgrade our transmission with a deep sump aluminum pan for greater fluid capacity and cooling, a 2,500 RPM stall converter with a billet front plate, and a case of transmission fluid. Before you go ahead and install that new torque converter into your transmission, there's a couple things you definitely need to take care of so you don't cause damage later on down the road. And the first and most important of those is fluid level. You absolutely never ever want to install a torque converter that's bone dry. If you forget the fluid, what'll happen is when you first start it up, it takes a very long time for the front pump to fill it with fluid, which means it's turning with no lubrication. And that could potentially damage the torque converter. And I don't know about you guys, but I really don't want to pull out a trans a second time just because I forgot a little bit of fluid. The next thing I like to do is take a little bit of ATF and just wipe it on the sealing surface of the torque converter. That way when we slide the converter into the transmission, it won't tear it. Now, a seal is something that's small and very inexpensive, but if it's damaged, that means pulling the trans out just to fix it. So we're going to definitely not do that. Carefully install the new torque converter, making sure it's fully seated. I just want to make sure you hear 3 clunks when you install one of these. There's one. There's felt like 2. I think that may be in. Yeah, that's definitely fully seated.
Cool. One thing to keep in mind when swapping out a 4L80 behind an LS is torque converter pilot spacing. These swaps have become so popular that companies like Monster have started selling torque converters with an extended pilot. This way, we don't have to run a spacer, which is designed for a stock torque converter. Now, if we were to run this spacer, there's a good chance that we could damage the pump inside the transmission. And if the pilot were too short, it could damage a bearing.
We're back on the install of our Monster 4L80E. With a new trans rolled underneath the truck, raise it up into place and line everything up. Once it's seated, start some bell housing bolts and then torque them down. This transmission swap has been 100% bolt in so far. It couldn't be going any smoother.
We've got a lot accomplished on our 2010 Silverado. Our Monster transmission's installed, our Earl's trans cooler up front, and we rebuilt the rear axle. So at least now we'll be spinning both tires, but that's only prepared us for what's to come.
That's right. Every modification we've done to this Silverado so far has been a preparation for this. We want a good, strong foundation so we don't have to worry about breaking anything, because next time you see this truck, we'll be bolting on the single 76mm turbo. We'll also get into the fuel system and ignition system just to make sure everything will stand up. But we'll get this thing on the dyno and we'll make some big power. That's a promise.
Cool, man. Don't blow it up.